Hello, this is day 66 of reading one canto of the Divine Comedy every single day. We are on Purgatorio, Canto 32, which I'll read from the Longfellow translation before giving some quick commentary. So steadfast and attentive were mine eyes in satisfying their decennial thirst, that all my other senses were extinct. And upon this side and on that they had walls of indifference, so the holy smile drew them unto itself with the old net, when forcibly my sight was turned away towards my left hand by those goddesses, because I heard from them a too intently, and that condition of the sight which is in eyes but lately smitten by the sun bereft me of my vision some short while. But to the less, when sight reshaped itself, I say the less in reference to the greater splendor from which perforce I had withdrawn, I saw upon its right wing wheeled about the glorious host, returning with the sun and with the sevenfold flames upon their faces. As underneath its shields, to save itself, a squadron turns, and with its banner wheels, before the whole thereof can change its front, that soldiery of the celestial kingdom which marched in the advance had wholly passed us before the chariot had turned its pole. Then to the wheels the maidens turned themselves, and the griffin moved his burden benedict, so that not a feather of him fluttered. The lady fair, who drew me through the ford, followed with Statius and myself, the wheel which made its orbit with the lesser arc. So passing through the lofty forest, vacant by fault of her who in the serpent trusted, angelic music made our steps keep time. Perchance as great a space had in 3 flights an arrow loosened from the string overpast, as we had moved when Beatrice descended. I heard them murmur all together, Adam! Then circled they about a tree, despoiled of blooms and other leafage on each bough. Its tresses, which so much the more dilate as higher they ascend, had been by Indians among their forests marveled at for height. Blessed art thou, O Griffin, who dost not pluck with thy beak these branches sweet to taste, since appetite by this was turned to evil. After this fashion round the tree robust the others shouted, and the twofold creature, thus is preserved the seed of all the just. And turning to the pole which he had dragged, he drew it close beneath the widowed bough, and what was of it unto it left bound. In the same manner as our trees, when downward falls the great light, with that together mingled which after the celestial Lasca shines, begin to swell, and then renew themselves, each one with its own color, ere the sun harness his steeds beneath another star, less than of rose, and more than violet, a hue disclosing, was renewed the tree that had erewhile its boughs so desolate. I never heard, nor here below is sung, the hymn which afterward that people sang, nor did I bear the melody throughout. Had I the power to paint how fell asleep those eyes compassionless, of Syrinx hearing, those eyes to which more watching costs so dear, even as a painter who from model paints I would portray how I was lulled asleep. He may, who well can picture drowsyhood. Therefore I passed to what time I awoke, and say a splendor rent from me the veil of slumber, and a calling, Rise, what dost thou? As to behold the apple tree in blossom, which makes the angels greedy for its fruit, and keeps perpetual bridals in the heaven, Peter and John and James conducted were, and, overcome, recovered at the word by which still greater slumbers have been broken, and saw their school diminished by the loss not only of Elias, but of Moses, and the apparel of their master changed. So I revived, and saw that piteous one above me standing, who had been conductress aforetime of my steps beside the river. And all in doubt, I said, Where's Beatrice? And she, Behold her, seated underneath the leafage new upon the root of it. Behold the company that circles her, the rest behind the griffin are ascending, with more melodious song, and more profound. And if her speech were more diffuse, I know not, because already in my sight was she who from the hearing of aught else had shut me. Alone she sat upon the very earth, left there as guardian of the chariot, which I had seen the biform monster fasten. Encircling her a cloister made themselves the 7 nymphs, with those lights in their hands which are secure from Aquilon and Auster. Short while shalt thou be here a forester, and thou shalt be with me for evermore a citizen of that Rome where Christ is Roman. Therefore, for that world's good which liveth ill, Fix on the car thine eyes, and what thou seest, having returned to earth, take heed thou write. Thus Beatrice, and I, who at the feet of her commandments all devoted was, mine mind and eyes directed where she willed. Never descended with so swift a motion fire from a heavy cloud, when it is raining from out the region which is most remote. As I beheld the bird of Jove descend down through the tree, rending away the bark, as well as blossoms and the foliage new. And he with all his might the chariot smote, whereat it reeled, like a vessel in a tempest, tossed by the waves, now starboard and now larboard. Thereafter saw I leap into the body of the triumphal vehicle a fox, that seemed unfed with any wholesome food. But for his hideous sins upbraiding him, my lady put him to as swift a flight as such a fleshless skeleton could bear. Then, by the way that it before had come, into the chariot's chest I saw the eagle descend, and leave it feathered with his plumes. And such as issues from a heart that mourns, a voice from heaven there issued, and it said, My little bark, how badly art thou freighted! Methought, then, that the earth did yawn between both wheels, and I saw rise from it a dragon, who through the chariot upward fixed his tail, and as a wasp that draweth back its sting, drawing unto himself his tail malign, drew out the floor, and went his way rejoicing. That which remained behind, even as with grass a fertile region with the feathers, offered perhaps with pure intention and benign, reclothed itself, and with them were reclothed the pole and both the wheels so speedily, a sigh doth longer keep the lips apart. Transfigured thus the holy edifice thrust forward heads upon the parts of it, 3 on the pole and 1 at either corner. The first were horned like oxen, but the 4 had but a single horn upon the forehead. A monster such had never yet been seen. Firm as a rock upon a mountain high, seated upon it there appeared to me a shameless whore, with eyes swift glancing round, and, as if not to have her taken from him, upright beside her I beheld a giant, and ever and anon they kissed each other. But, because she her wanton roving eye turned upon me, her angry paramour did scourge her from her head unto her feet. Then, full of jealousy and fierce with wrath, he loosed the monster, and across the forest dragged it so far, he made of that alone a shield unto the whore and the strange beast. This is by far one of the most heavily symbolic and downright strange cantos I have read in the Divine Comedy here. I was not able to discern much of what was going on, but thankfully Mark Musa was there to help. Number 1, as the ladies predicted would happen, when Dante looks into Beatrice's eyes, he goes blind for a second. He cannot handle the light that is within. He needs grace. He needs the grace of the theological virtues to allow him to be able to experience that. If you remember in the Old Testament, God says to Moses, no one can see my face and live. Not as in, if you see me, I'm going to kill you, but more like, you can't handle the beauty and the goodness that is within my face. It will overwhelm you. It will destroy you, not because those things are bad, but because you are too small, too weak to contain it. And at the moment, Dante being alive and being human and not being in heaven yet, yes, that is the case. In heaven, however, the souls of the blessed there can comprehend that light, can experience it without dying. Not its fullness, of course, because only God can comprehend his entire self, but in any case, Dante experiencing a fraction of that eternal light in the eyes of Beatrice is, of course, then struck blind for a second. Next, he, Beatrice, Statius, Matilda, and the entire rest of the procession continue onward, and he falls asleep at the foot of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the very same tree from Genesis. It's completely barren. There's no leaves, there's no fruits on it anymore. And then very quickly, the griffin gets praised for not eating of the tree before it drops off the cart, the chariot that it was pulling, right next to the tree. Dante falls asleep, like I said, and then when he wakes up, he goes to find Beatrice, and she says, look carefully at the cart so that you can tell everyone down below about it. This is for their benefit. What we see next are a series of scenes that are taken from church history. Some are more clear than others. The symbols in the scenes are reminiscent of the Book of Revelation, for the most part, and it's hard for me to wrap my head around what exactly we're supposed to be thinking about these symbols as they appear. They're not just engravings or drawings upon the chariot, they're happening in front of Dante. I suspect we're meant to interpret these scenes that happen in front of Dante as sort of a living picture. There's at least 7 different scenes that are depicted through the rest of the canto. I'll explain 1 or 2 of them, which I could only figure out thanks to Mark Musa. Early on, a fox that looks like it's starving hops into the chariot and then is driven out by Beatrice. Now, one of the things that Beatrice represents, according to Mark Musa, is divine wisdom. And he explains also that the fox likely represents the Gnostic heresy. I've used that word before. Gnosticism is the belief that the body and matter is evil, that it's dirty, that you cannot associate with it if you want to get to heaven. Practitioners of Gnosticism back in the first few centuries would have insisted that God would not become man. He wouldn't have soiled himself that way. They would have insisted that Jesus was not God, or if he was, then that it was just an illusion. He didn't really have a body. But also have, depending on who they were, have either fasted or completely refrained from procreation or drinking or eating or any association with worldly life, or they would have concluded, well, these things don't really matter. They don't matter to the salvation of my soul, so I can do whatever I want with them. They either completely abstained from those things as much as possible, or they were extremely licentious with them. Anyways, that was a heresy, which Beatrice, representing divine wisdom, drives out of the chariot. At one point, an eagle drops gold feathers into the chariot, which is a familiar scene that we've seen referred to many times throughout the comedy by Dante, and that is the church growing in concern for temporal wealth. That's gold. And that causes it to grow heads, changes from a chariot into this 7-headed beast, again, drawn from Revelation. And then in the final scene, we have the chariot beast, we have a prostitute, and a giant. Mark Musa says that the giant represents one of the French kings, and his kissing of the prostitute represents the ongoing convergence of interests between the church and the kings of France, who were both getting involved in the same political squabbles and conflicts. And then finally, the giant gets jealous and takes the prostitute away. Now, what's significant about that is, according to Mark Musa, it represents the Avignon papacy, a time where the Pope stopped living in Rome and actually moved to Avignon in France. It caused a whole big issue, and there were 3 popes for a few years. This is something that is in the future for Dante. Not Dante the writer, but Dante the pilgrim. Because remember, Dante the pilgrim is in the year 1300. Avignon didn't happen until maybe 1305. And so he's prophesying about things that have not happened yet. But even Mark Musa and other Dante scholars are confused and uncertain about what many of these scenes mean. And I doubt anybody knows, except for Dante himself. That's all for today, though. I'll see you tomorrow.